I spent a lot of time this week and last talking about how we were going to do this conversation. And we rebuilt the talk a whole bunch of times. And at some point, we realized that maybe the thing to do to humanize this process was both humanize ourselves in this process and talk about the journey we've been on trying to set this up as a way of maybe describing the tone, one of the tones that we're hoping happening. So one of the first things that I unlearned this week working with Jess was the value of a shared understanding. We met on Friday and I was like, okay, I got a task to do. What's the question? What are we trying to get done? Let's get the slide set up. Let's get this done. And that was really the way I came into that conversation. I was convinced that we were going to get the work done and I could move on to my next task. And Jess just looks at me and goes, just a second. You and I have never actually had a real conversation.
I think I said, who the heck are you?
Who the heck are you is what you said. We've never talked to each other. Like, let's just spend a moment getting to know each other a little bit so that we can, sort of get this work done. And it really, really unsettled me. I was like, but I have a task to do. We have a job to get done. And she's like, I could just see the look on her face. She was being patient with me. She was waiting it out. And then I was like, you're right. This is about humanizing learning. And here I am just trying to get a task done. I'm totally missing the point, the project that I'm in. So for me, one of my big unlearnings this week was just take the time to get to know each other, take the time to build some kind of shared understanding and to sort of move away from that constant need to get the task done. So thanks for that, Jess.
The tricky thing is that doesn't work unless you have somebody who comes at this with curiosity and generosity. And that's what Dave met my question, who the heck are you with? He thought, well, wait a minute, let's slow down. Let's have that chat. We've actually never gotten to know each other. Okay, let's do this thing. And I think he even said that.
I did.
He said, well, we've never had a chat. Let's sit down. We have no agenda. Let's start with curiosity. Let's start with kindness, openness. But that kind of curiosity and generosity isn't always there. So you can't mandate that these things happen. The best you can do is try to set the context for it to happen. And that was something that Dave and I both created together.
In all of our conversations, Jess and I come from very different sort of approaches to the conversation around humanizing learning, but a totally shared personal background, which was kind of one of the weird discoveries that we had. One of the things that kept happening over and over again was that she would say something and I'd be like, oh, I don't know anything about that. Clearly, I'm not a professional. If I was a professional, I would have known that. And then and at some point we kind of looked at each other and just kind of admitted that, she knows stuff and I know stuff. And even though we kind of do the same thing, that imposter syndrome response, that sense of I need to sort of protect myself from the sense of not knowing, just wasn't necessary. So giving up on, like, giving over to the value of connection, to the idea that her having a perspective and me having a perspective, they don't need to join. We don't need to have the same perspective, but just that value and the power of that connection, and just letting go of as we called it many times in our conversation, that armor of professionalism that we put on each other that protects us from that sense that somebody might think we don't know what's going on. So that was another big unlearning for me this week. And again, super unsettling to sort of look at somebody and go, you know what? She said, one of the things she said today, just think of a student walking in who's left-handed looking for a left-handed desk. It's a simple point. Never occurred to me in my life. Of course it does. It's a very simple, observable way in which, we've created spaces that aren't necessarily for everybody, but those are the kinds of lessons that I'm learning, just keeping myself open to that. It can be unsettling, but it's been a really good lesson this week.
And we were in that together. That imposter syndrome was coming straight out of me, going straight to Dave, laser eyes. But in doing that together and being in that space together and being able to talk a little bit about it, we were building trust. And that wasn't trust because of an expected outcome or an agenda or a task. We weren't on task. We're building something together. And in the building together, we were building trust. We were building a dexterity with being able to talk to each other and being able to share those things. Dave knows a lot of things I don't know. And now, because of that moment, because of those moments we've spent, we were able to start to share those things and benefit from each other's areas. We've been adjacent professionally for many years, but we haven't been together until this week, and it's been really special.
Absolutely. So bringing this back to learning and teaching, which is what we're here to talk about, that humanizing process was about the process that we had between the two of us. We needed to humanize ourselves before we could actually get down to humanizing our conversation around teaching and learning. So one of the positions I took up, which is my sort of classic position, is the historical perspective on education, where I'm like, you know, we've got that catechetical model of education that comes from, you know, the 11th, 12th, 13th century, where we had call and repeat in the classroom because, well, the books were worth a fortune and we wouldn't let the students touch them. Catechetical was definitely one of those things that we needed to do, right? We've inherited that tradition. It was a necessity at the time, just in order to be able to scale the word, right? The only way you could scale the usage of that book was to have somebody say it out loud. The only way you were taking the content of that book out of the classroom was by remembering it, right? Total necessity based on the technology at the time. I'll leave that there. I'll pass it over to you, Jess. So that's just one of those places where we can unlearn some of the historical pieces that we've inherited inside of education. And that unlearning process is always unsettling. And I'll pass it over to Jess.
And then I came at Dave with a fire hose of frustration about the system of education, about the notion of efficiency, which ones are good and which ones do harm, and who makes the decision, about the economics of education. I'm not naive enough to be totally tuned out to them, but I'm disappointed that it isn't transparent and that we don't talk about the decisions that are being made in the design of education that have everything to do with economics and nothing to do with teaching or learning, or God forbid, pedagogy. Who makes the decisions? I'm frustrated that the fire marshal is likely the person that tells us how many people can fit into the room. How many students is the optimal number for the class? Who decides? I wasn't asked. Was the fire marshal? Who decides about those left-handed desks that Dave's talking about? Who decides on having handed desks at all? Someone in procurement usually makes the decisions about the literal furniture we put our bodies on to do the act of teaching and learning, and who's comfortable in that space. Who do they consult? Who has the power in the room? Who's expected to have all the answers? I wanted us to critique and interrogate the transactional nature of education. All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. They maybe memorize that in grade 6. Contribution of everyone in the transaction matters. It all makes up the community of learners and teachers. So what we want to do here today is talk about unlearning. We don't want to sink into the ruts of doing things the way we've always done them, where we spend the rest of our time deciding what is the common definition of unlearning. We don't want to do that. And it might feel awkward. Don't try to solve or try to solve anything. Don't try to solve anything today. Explore what you're thinking about openly and be open to what others are saying. Think about those edge cases. Think about that left-handed person in the case of a handed desk. And when you do this exploring, share the ideas about unlearning that might come from your own experiences or your own influences. We all come from different spaces. This is why different histories and different backgrounds. This is why Dave is talking about the history of the textbook and the history of education. So I think about that backpack that we carry, the backpack of your feelings. We all carry that backpack. It's our ancestors, our histories, our interactions, our experiences. When you walk into a room in a suit, how do people treat you? So these are the two streams, and you see on the picture, these two parallel lines. These are the two streams we'd like you to tune into today. The what is what we're talking about. That's unlearning, and unlearning for you. The how is how we're going to do that. And when you watch the video about brave spaces before the event, we're going to do that with self-awareness, with kindness, and with care.